Good evening. Thank you so much for coming out to our event. My name is Daniel Tsentsiper, and I'm a recent graduate of UC Berkeley, Go Bears, a student founder, and most recently, I've had the pleasure of working alongside Alex Budak to help launch his new book, Becoming a Changemaker, into this world. Before we start, I want to go ahead and do a couple of housekeeping items. Tonight's format will be an interactive Q&A. First, I'll kick us off with a question to Alex and then pass it off to our student moderators. Please save your questions towards the end of the second half of our call, and we will open up the stage to you. Lastly, by being here tonight, you have entered our raffle to win a signed copy of Alex's new book. It's a pretty sweet deal. Please be on the lookout from an email for us with a link to your order. Now I'll go ahead and introduce us to the three student representatives for Fighting for Hope at Cal, Net Impact at Berkeley, and ASRB that have came together to make this event possible. Sammy, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, for sure. Hi guys, I'm Sammy. I'm one of the co-presidents of Fighting for Hope at Cal. It's basically a mental health nonprofit started in high school, and it's focused on wellness, mental health, and education. And then next, I'll pass it off to Varsha.
Hi everyone, I'm Barsha. I'm president of Net Impact Berkeley this semester, and we've been lucky enough to have Professor Budak as our faculty representative for many semesters, so really love to have him on board. And we're a social impact focused consulting organization on campus that works with a lot of different types of companies and provides advice on how to pretty much help them achieve their social impact missions. And I'll pass it on to the next club.
Yeah, thank you, Farsha. So hi, my name is Vincent. I'm the external vice president for the Association for Socially Responsible Business. And we are also a social impact and a sustainability consulting club. So we also work with a variety of different clients and to achieve the social impact that they wish to achieve. And also we also host like educational events such as speaker panels and case competitions to help the Berkeley community be more aware of CS corporate social responsibility and making business for using business for a positive change. And yeah.
Thank you so much. And without further ado, let me go ahead and pin Alex to the screen. There you are. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. Alex Budak is a social entrepreneur, faculty member at Berkeley Haas, and the author of Becoming a Changemaker. At Cal, he created and teaches the overly subscribed and transformative course, Becoming a Changemaker, which several of you, including myself, have taken at Cal. Alex consults and advises organizations with the mission of helping people from all walks of life become changemaker, and has given talks in venues around the world, from Cambodia to Ukraine to the White House, UN agencies, and companies like Accenture and Airbnb. So Alex, you've had a fascinating career in social entrepreneurship, academia, and now as an author. A common theme in your work is you help people realize their inner changemaker. So my first question to you is, what does the term changemaker mean to you and your work? And why did you make this the center of your career?
Thank you, Daniel. And thanks to these three amazing organizations for hosting me. Thanks to all of you for joining. I know it's midterm season, so thanks for hanging out late at night and talking changemaking. I really appreciate it and really look forward to getting to know all of you during our time together. So changemaking to me, the way I define it is radically inclusive. So I simply define a changemaker as someone who leads positive change from wherever they are. So you'll notice that in that definition, there's no mention of roles or titles. I believe that a Nobel Prize winner has just as much claim to that title as an entry-level product manager who comes up with a new way to question the status quo. I think it's a radically inclusive definition and identity we can all try on. I think we have so many identities which are exclusive. So we say, okay, I'm either an engineer or I'm not, or I'm an artist or I'm not. And I think changemaker is an identity we can layer on top of our existing identities to give us a sense of purpose, a lens of impact, and a chance for us to lead positive change from wherever we might be.
Awesome. And then our next question is kind of a fun one. It's basically, in your book, you spotlight a lot of change makers and their change maker moments. Could you share one or two of like your favorite ones with us?
Oh, that's so hard because there's so many. There's, I think, over 50 stories in there, and it's hard to even know where to start. One favorite example I have, which just points to, I think as change makers, we need to hold on to multiple polarities all at once. And that means that, like, for instance, as a change maker, you've got to have this sense of urgency when you look at the changes that our companies, communities, and world need, they're urgent. Thinking about racial justice or climate justice, they're things that require action right away. But also recognizing that change takes time, that change won't happen overnight, and we can't burn ourselves out in 2 weeks. So there's a number of these different polarities like urgency and long-term thinking. One of my favorite, which is maybe a bit counterintuitive, it's based off of one of Haas's defining leadership principles, which is confidence without attitude. So I think it's so important that as change makers, we're both of these things. We're both confident and we're humble. So an example I love to tell is the story of Gwen Yi Wang. Gwen is based in Malaysia, and she's the founder of a company called Tribeless. Tribeless creates products and apps to teach emotional intelligence and empathy. So by all outward measures, in 2019, she was thriving. She was on the cover of Malaysian magazines, and she was just doing incredible work. Her company was scaling quickly, like every CEO's dream. But internally, she didn't feel it quite resonating with her. She realized that the company had gotten to a point where it honestly needed a different type of leader than the one she was. She's a visionary, she's a product person, but the company now needed someone who's more operational, that could scale their processes. And she kept fighting it until she had a realization that it was time for her to step back as CEO. Now, what's so remarkable about that is that so many of the leaders, the entrepreneurs I work with, they want to be CEO for life, and they're going to hold on to it no matter what happens. But Gwen is a perfect embodiment of confidence without attitude. She had the confidence to, first of all, step up and found the organization, to put herself out there as a leader, to raise capital. But she also had the humility to know when it was time for her to step back, to know when her leadership, her brand of leadership, was no longer what best served the team. And I think it also takes a lot of confidence to have that difficult conversation she told me about, where she had to talk with her co-founder and say, hey, I'm going to step back from the CEO role. It didn't happen quickly. It took months of self-reflection, but she decided to step back, which again takes confidence. And as she did, she stepped into this new role, a product role, which, by the way, was perfect timing because she stepped into it just as COVID hit. So she was able to oversee their product as they transitioned to a completely digital product. But I think she embodies this idea of being both confident and humble at the same time, not a little bit confident and a little bit humble, which is what we often think we need to be. But she's confident. She believes in her ideas. She stands up. She fights for change. But at the same time, she models her own failability. She talks about her own shortcomings, and she makes it safe for others to be part of her leadership team as well. So again, Sammy, great question. But I could have chosen hundreds of possible stories, but Gwen is one that's on my mind now.
Hi, Professor. So one question I had was, I know a lot of students, especially in Berkeley, are really interested in entering the social entrepreneurship space as well as starting a social enterprise, but it can be a bit intimidating and unclear as to how to start. So my question to you is, what advice do you have for students who are interested in that path to get started?
It's a great question. And I think the first is you have to become absolutely obsessed with the problem that you want to solve. I think that entrepreneurship is really hard. And I think social entrepreneurship is even harder because it's everything that entrepreneurship is, plus trying to make an impact, plus trying to create systems change. One of the things I love about the truly great social entrepreneurs is that they want to put themselves out of business. They only want to be in it as long as they're needed, and that hopefully they fundamentally solve a social challenge. They change systems so that their work is no longer needed, and then they're done. But that's a radical way of thinking about our life and our career. And so being a social entrepreneur is not for everyone. So I think what I would say, go into it knowing it's going to be a really hard path. There's going to be a tons of ups and downs, a ton of setbacks, a ton of failures. Perhaps your parents will be like mine and they won't even know what a social entrepreneur is when you get started. So there's a lot of hurdles to take on. So make sure that when you decide to become a social entrepreneur, that you're deeply passionate about it. When I was at Reach for Change in Sweden, we invested in social entrepreneurs. And one of the things I looked for was, would this social entrepreneur keep working on this cause no matter what happened? Like, are they so obsessed they would just keep going and going and going? And that's, I think, the type of drive you have to have. Now, I also want to say that not everyone can nor should be a social entrepreneur. That's really why I teach change making, because I believe there's so many different paths to leading positive change. Even though here in Silicon Valley, we tend to do something called heropreneurship, which is where we put the lone hero, the lone entrepreneur up on a pedestal. Change takes all of us. And any amazing organization you look at, it's of course the entrepreneur gets it started, but they need the chief operating officer, the chief marketing officer, the chief product officer. Like these are all crucial roles. And so if you don't feel naturally called to be a social entrepreneur, don't feel that pressure. Instead, find someone else that has an organization, an entity you believe in, and then use your skills, your talents in a way that's true to who you are to help them scale and make that idea sustainable.
Yeah, thank you for that, Professor. You kind of touched upon this during like the beginning of like the previous question. My question is based on what is the biggest challenge that social enterprises face? Like, great, like a student has started has had their foot into the social entrepreneurship space, but what would you say are like the challenges you should be prepared to face?
That's a great question. And I guess I'll go back to the reason that I started Start Some Good in the first place. So I was inspired by the belief that there's change makers all around the world, but just too many barriers getting in the way of people getting started. And I think something that good social entrepreneurs do is they pay attention to things that make them mad, that sort of feel like a violation of their values. And so there are a couple of things when it came to starting a social venture that really bothered me. The first is that the way we fund social ventures is usually that we make these entrepreneurs write a grant, and then there's someone sitting in a room by themselves looking at a stack of 100 applications, and out of the 100, they choose one they want to invest in. I think that's broken, because who knows better what a community needs than the community itself? And I think we need to shift much more of the power to the local community, make sure they decide what they need, rather than people coming in from the top down. So that's the first thing, is changing the way we think about funding to be more community-centric. But then the second thing, which is a real challenge, is that it's of course never easy to raise capital, but it's often almost impossible to raise capital until you can prove your impact. But how do you prove your impact until you can raise some capital to launch a pilot? It's a catch-22 that so many social entrepreneurs face. And so that's why we started Start Some Good, was to get that early stage sort of risk capital in the hands of change makers who do amazing things with it. And so while of course it's fun to see that people on our site have raised as much as like a couple $100,000 for a venture, I'm equally, if not more, proud of the ones that raised a couple $100. I think about a group of high schoolers based in East Oakland that wanted to create an urban garden, and they raised, I think, $200 on the site. And that's literally all they needed to get money for seeds, for soil, for beds. And that was all that was holding them back from taking action in their community. So that's why I set out to solve those things. There's many challenges, but those are two of the ones that I found most pressing, that I felt committed to try and address.
Awesome. And then for our last question, for like the structured Q&A part, I was just wondering, like, do you have any advice for students on how to stay motivated and inspired during their like personal journeys, or like in self-development in that realm as well?
Yeah. So we talk a lot about purpose, I think. And I think purpose is many ways a privilege. I hope that you find a sense of purpose, but you can't force it. You can't go out there and be like, okay, you know what, today's Thursday, I'm going to go find my purpose today. It doesn't happen that way. Maybe you get lucky, maybe not. Maybe it takes a decade to figure it out. So the one thing that you can control is to commit to serving others, to find ways to be of use, to help others out. And I think if you have that impact orientation, trying to find ways to improve the lives of others in myriad ways, whatever that is, whether that's through education, through mental health, through starting a business, whatever it is. But if you can have that lens of how can I be looking out for others, that's going to set you up on a strong path for success. I'm inspired by the quote of Jackie Robinson, of course, the first Major League Baseball player who broke the color barrier. He says, "A life is not important except in the impact it has on others." And that's the quote that's always really driven me in my work, is to think about, well, it's not about me. It's about trying to make things better for someone else. The second piece of advice I would give, because I've had the privilege of teaching at Berkeley for a few years now, and I know that you are all exceptionally talented, exceptionally driven, and also in just the most intense competitive atmosphere I've ever seen. It's so important, I think, to focus on an intrinsic level of motivation rather than extrinsic, that it's so easy to compare yourself to others. And when you compare yourself to others, you'll always find someone doing something better on one element. You know, maybe you make $1 million and you go, oh, but Zuckerberg has billions. Or you make some impact, go, oh, but Elon Musk did this. You've got to find ways to focus more on your internal locus of control. I'm not saying it's easy. It certainly isn't, especially when there's so much pressure around you. But getting really true to what your values are, what the things are that you care about, that's unique to you. Because ultimately you need to live your life, not someone else's. And if you can live a life that's true to who you are and that you yourself are proud of, well, that's greater success than anything else I could imagine.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. Well, that's it for like the structured part. So now we're going to go into more of like an open Q&A. So anyone in the Zoom attendees can ask their own questions. You can either raise your hand and Alex will call on you, or you can put a question in the chat and then I can read your question, or you can also private message me your questions, but you can ask questions about anything. So feel free to raise your hand or anything. So it looks like Kaya, is that how you say it? Oh yeah, go ahead. You can unmute.
Okay. Hi, Professor. Already your answers have been like really practical and inclusive, I feel like. So thank you for like, I don't know, putting it in that context. It makes it more attainable for, I feel, a lot of people like college students. So my question would be, I think I'm personally really curious about kind of the intersection between how business hits change making and social impact and a lot of those kind of broad topics. And I'm kind of curious on the next steps, like you would recommend someone like an undergraduate to take like to kind of achieve that.
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Kaya. I think the first thing for us to think about is how can you bring an impact lens into everything that you do? And there's a number of different frameworks, and you can find the one that most resonates with you. So perhaps when you think about making impact, maybe you'll be most passionate about DEI/BJ. That's an important lever for impact, important lens. Maybe you'll be really passionate about sustainability. Maybe you'll think about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Maybe think about justice. First come to terms with what is that sort of impact lens that you want to put front and center. I won't say that one's better or more important than the other. They're all important, and we need people thinking about all of them. But think about the one that's most sort of aligned with what you do. I think if we were to be talking like 10 years ago and you want to have an impact, well, the answer would be, cool, go work for a nonprofit, go work for a charity. And the really good news now is that there's this really wonderful blurring of the lines. There's social enterprises, there's B Corps, there's for-profit companies that try to be mission driven. Just as an example, I had the VP of social impact at LinkedIn, Meg Garlandhouse, come speak to my class yesterday. And LinkedIn is a publicly traded company. They're not a social enterprise, but they've got a really strong mission in terms of making opportunities accessible to people all around the world. And then you've got, of course, the kind of nonprofits and charities as well. So this makes it more complicated for you, because it used to be if you want to do good, cool, go work for a nonprofit. Now you've got your choice of any type of organizational form. But as you think about it, I encourage you to not just think of yourself in traditional impact roles, but also think about, no matter what your role is, how can you bring that lens of impact front and center? So imagine that you want to go be a product manager. Cool, that's not a traditional social impact role, but I would argue you have the opportunity to have huge impact in the world. Think about like all the bias that's in AI. And so if you bring a DEI lens into the way you are a product manager, well, cool, that's an amazing way you can start leveraging impact. Or let's say you take a very traditional job at a very traditional company, but you care a lot about sustainability. Well, can you find ways to make this really big multinational company think more clearly and effectively about their climate strategy? Again, that's not a formal role or a formal title, but it's a chance for you to lead change from where you are. So on one hand, it's a little bit more complicated than it was 10 years ago. But on the other hand, it's a lot more opportunity filled. So I think I would start with figuring out like, what's the lens you're most passionate about? And then how can you apply that to whatever it is that you may want to do?
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kaya, for being the first one to ask a question. I know it can sometimes be scary to be the first one to put yourself out there. So I deeply appreciate you doing that.
Well, I guess if no one else has a question for now, I guess, could you maybe discuss like any advice on how to deal with imposter syndrome or something like that? Because I feel like a lot of Berkeley students struggle with that. And I feel like that's a really prevalent topic here.
That's a huge, huge thing. I think all of us feel imposter syndrome one time or another. I know I felt a ton of imposter syndrome just in writing a book. And so it's always there. And we tend to think that we're the only ones that feel it, when the truth is most of us are feeling it. One of the things that I tell my students is that sometimes they come to me because they say, look, I want to participate in class, but everyone else seems so confident, like they really know what they're doing. And what I tell them is like, honestly, no one knows what they're doing. We're all figuring it out as we go. And so to try to get a little bit more comfortable with that. So I think the main thing is to recognize that it's not you, that all of us feel it, and to never ever question, do you deserve to be at Berkeley? Because you absolutely, absolutely do. So stop comparing yourself and just recognize that you do deserve to be here, and to try to use your talents in the best way that you possibly can.
Akash, you can go now.
So you were talking about intrinsic sources of motivation rather than extrinsic sources of motivation. So I was wondering, what are some intrinsic sources of motivation for you that helped you tackle things like imposter syndrome, as you were talking about before?
Yeah, super important question. Thanks for that. I'll start with some research that I love. So a researcher who is based in New York, a doctor, like a general doctor, found that radiologists, when they brought back their reports, were making a lot of mistakes and not sending a very long, detailed report. Now, this isn't a critique of radiologists, because they're plenty smart and they're plenty well trained, but he tried an experiment. So he said, okay, in addition to sending on the X-ray of a broken rib or broken arm, he would also send a picture of the patient, the 5-year-old girl, the 50-year-old woman, the 10-year-old kid, whatever, as an experiment. And what he found is that when the radiologist saw both the X-ray as well as the picture of the person behind it, not only did their accuracy rates go up, the length of their responses also increased dramatically. So why is that? Radiologists get into the work because they have a sense of purpose. They want to help people. But then along the way, they find themselves, sitting in a dark room for 8 hours a day, looking at X-ray after X-ray after X-ray, and they can lose track of that sense of purpose. So I think the first thing is to try to anchor yourself back in that sense of purpose. Why are you doing what it is that you're doing in the first place? Is it that you're a first-gen student and you want to show to your parents and your community, like, hey, this is possible? Do you want to set an example for your siblings? Maybe it's a sense of values. So I talked, for instance, with Start Some Good about a couple of things that felt like really strong values conflicts for me, things that just didn't sit well with me. That's often a sign that it's values that you deeply care about, and it's a reason to keep going. So those are a couple of ideas for how you can think about sort of finding that intrinsic motivation. But I think that, let's also be honest, it's hard, right? It's much easier to sort of compare yourself against the yardstick of someone else. Like at Berkeley, we make it very easy for you to compare because, I don't know, there's a curve and like, cool, I got a 3.7, but that means someone else got a 4. And much easier to compare that way versus like to be honest with yourself and be like, you know what? If I just get a B in this class, that's fine with me because I want to do really, really well in these 2 other classes. So I'll put a lot of my effort there and just be okay with a B. That's something that's a very personal decision. I won't say that it's the right decision for everyone, but that's an example of where you can sort of buck the trend and say, look, no, how I do in astronomy doesn't honestly matter to me in my future career. I don't want to fail it, but no, B is fine. But I really, really want to do well in my sustainable capitalism class. And I'm going to really focus on that. So that's a couple of ideas that maybe one of those will be helpful for you. Thanks for that question.
Thank you.
Awesome. And then Ria's raising her hand, so she'll ask a question next.
Yeah. So my question is, so you're talking about motivation and things like that, but like people can have motivation, but I feel like burnout is a very big thing at Berkeley. So how do you suggest that we deal with that?
Huge thing. And like, I'll be honest with you that I burned out myself in the days of leading Start Some Good. I wasn't practicing what I now teach. I was working 80, 90 hours a week. I was exhausted. I got to the point where I couldn't see the forest for the trees. People would ask me, hey, Alex, how are you doing? And I would answer based on how well Start Some Good was doing. I'd be like, well, Start Some Good had a good day, or we got a new partnership, or it's been a bad day in revenue. Like I'd become so wrapped up in my venture that I had lost complete track of sort of who I was as an individual. So I say this from personal experience that burnout is all too real. And I think especially among change makers, when we deeply care about leading change, it's really easy for us to sacrifice ourselves and our own well-beings. So I'd say a couple of things here. The first is advice that came from one of my favorite guest speakers in my classes, Sid Espinoza. He's the first ever Latino mayor of Palo Alto, California. And at the time he was VP of philanthropy at Microsoft. He's currently head of social impact at GitHub. So a student asked him a question about like, hey, how do I create change when it feels really overwhelming? I think they're passionate about climate, but like, how do I leave a dent in climate? And he said, we've got to stop thinking about change as an individual sprint, where it's our job to just do as much as we possibly can. Instead, we've got to start seeing things as a relay race, that our job is to take the baton from those that have come before us. And in the 2, 5, 10, 20, 40, 50 years that we're working on a cause, to try to advance the baton as much as we possibly can. And then when the time comes to hand the baton off to the next generation, to be really good stewards, to find ways to mentor them, to advise them, to guide them, to set them up for success. So I think the first thing is to take the pressure off, start seeing change making as a team sport, recognize that we can't possibly do all of this change by ourselves, but we can do it if we work together with others. And the second thing is, what's often called like self-care, which I think gets kind of a bad rap, but it's super important. It's not just a luxury, it's something we have to do, and we've got to get in the practice of doing it. I teach in my class a framework that comes from Stephen Covey. He talks about something called sharpening the saw. I think it's a good analogy. He says that if you're trying to saw down a tree, most of us would just take the saw and just keep sawing and sawing and sawing. And with each successive cut, the blade on the saw will get even more dull. That means that the 30th time we saw will be way less effective than the first time. But most of us just keep sawing and sawing and sawing until the tree falls down. He says, no, what we have to do is instead sharpen the saw, step away, get that saw sharp again. And then when we come back, we'll be way more effective in our ability to chop it down. Same idea with us. So he breaks self-renewal down into 4 buckets. And I think these are 4 good buckets. It's something that I think a lot about for myself. So the first is physical, taking care of our physical body. And that could be sleeping well, eating well, getting exercise, moving around. The second is mental. So that's learning, growing, reading, writing, sort of challenging or engaging our mental mind. The third is social and emotional. It's building and reconnecting with meaningful emotional connections, friends, family members, community, etc. And then the fourth is spiritual. And it could be religious, but doesn't have to be. Could be meditation, could be yoga, could be walks in nature. And I like this framework because he says that it's not like you're ever going to be a 10 out of 10 on all 4 of those. But if when you're starting to feel burned out, you can kind of check in and say, well, have I been like taking good care of 3 of these things, but like I'm just not sleeping enough and I'm not exercising, like I'm just not taking care of my physical body. Well, cool. That's a reminder to spend a little more time focused on that bucket, perhaps. So I think self-renewal is not selfish. And it's crucially important for you to be able to lead change effectively. The third and final thing that I'll share is I think it's really valuable to think of your life in terms of seasons. So we have seasons that are busier and seasons that are less so. Seasons where we focus on one thing, seasons where we focus on others. Some of you perhaps want to become medical doctors. If you do, you'll be going through medical residency, which to me is just absolutely insane. Like, I don't know how many hours a week you work. It's like as many hours as there are in the week, basically. But you go into it knowing, okay, well, residency is like a year or whatever. And I know it's gonna be super intense. I'm gonna pause things. I'm gonna focus on that because then I know I'll get more of a work-life balance after that. I think we can take that same idea in terms of the seasons of our lives. So for instance, for me, I'm a super proud dad. It's maybe my favorite identity that I have. And actually, here's my little guy. He's sleeping right now. I'm watching him. So when he was born, I've got a lot of things going on professionally, but I let all of them take a backseat because that was by far the most important thing to me, to spend time with him. Then when it came time for the book to come out, I sort of recognized, okay, well, this is gonna be a really busy period in my life. Instead of teaching multiple classes in a given semester, I'm only teaching 1 this fall, so I can really focus on the book and giving talks like this. And I know this won't be forever. It'll be for the next couple of months. And then once the sort of craziness of the book launch subsides, well, then I'll pick up other things again. It doesn't work if you think that you're always on this grind forever at this intensity always. But if instead you can start seeing things in terms of seasons where you go, okay, for the next month, I'm gonna be really focused on this. For the next 3 months, this is where I'll put my energy. It becomes much more manageable, I think, because you know it's time bound. And just like seasons, summer doesn't last forever, winter doesn't last forever.
I love that. Like, that
Thank
was
you.
such a great answer.
Yeah.
Does
Thanks so
anyone
much.
have any other questions? You can also private message me if you don't want to say it out loud or anything. Oh wait, Daniel's raising his hand.
I remember vividly, it was fall of 2021 when I was taking your course. You came into the classroom, you said, I'm sending the book out to the publishers. We're almost there. So I would just like to hear, how was the process of writing your book from, start to finish? What were some of the challenges? What were some of the most exciting parts? And what's your mindset like now that you've launched this book into the world?
Thanks. Yeah, it's a wild roller coaster ride for sure. The only analogy I can think of is sort of my social entrepreneurship journey, because there's so many ups and downs and so much intensity. And I think also like startup, there's also a lot of things I didn't know before going into it. And that naivete is probably a good thing when it comes down to it. So, I mean, highlights for me include like the moment that I got my agent, who's just been absolutely terrific in this. And then of course, the moment that I got the publisher. I was really strongly believing that this was the publisher that I wanted to publish. The editor, she really saw eye to eye. She really got it. And she really believed in the mission of change making. So when we had that first call, you talk with lots of different publishers, but after our first call together, I knew like, she's who I want to have as my editor. Like this is the publisher I want to be with. And so when the offer came in that she also wanted to work with us, that was a really special moment for sure. Then there's also the hard work of writing the book. So we found out that I was going to be writing the book at just about the same time that we found out that my wife, Rebecca, was expecting our little guy. And so I figured, okay, well, I'm never going to have more free time in my life than the next 7 months before he arrives. So I really used that as a chance to write as much of the book as I could. And there's a lot of experimentation because I think you've got to find your rhythm. And I honestly don't consider myself a good writer. I got into this kind of reluctantly. I didn't set out to write the book, but after enough students told me how impactful the class was and that it should be a book, I kind of brushed off the first few. But after enough told me, I thought, okay, well, maybe something's there. Maybe it can be of service. So I had to really find like what my groove was, because in grad school, like I just suffered through trying to get my thesis done and then thinking about like writing a 300-page book, really daunting. So I experimented. I'm kind of a night person. So I said, okay, well, maybe I'll do my best writing at like 10 p.m. So let me try writing at 10 p.m. That did not work. Then I said, okay, well, maybe like midday is like a break. That did not work. Maybe morning. And I thought, yeah, actually morning is what works best for me. Then I said, okay, well, maybe I should try writing for 3 hours. And I thought that's too much. And I tried, well, maybe I'll just write for 45 minutes. And I thought, no, I can keep going. So I found that eventually like 2 hours in the morning was kind of my sweet spot. I share that only because you'll find your own sweet spot, whatever that is. But you've got to try things out and find and kind of get that rhythm. Then I personally found the process of getting the initial ideas out there like really fun. Like I enjoyed that part, the first draft. I didn't have to worry about grammar too much. I just focused on getting ideas on paper. Then my editor and we used Google Docs for her to give me feedback. And I made the mistakes of leaving notifications on. So sometimes I wake up in the morning and get something like, Nana has left 875 suggestions for you and 112 comments. Like, oh man, this is a lot to go through. I'm grateful because she made my writing so much better, but I found that process really hard, like trying to get 2 paragraphs into one. And I think you fall in love with your writing and your ideas. And so it's really hard when I had to like cut stories of change makers that I really liked or cut examples. I found that tough. And then I guess the second part is that writing and putting a book out to the world takes 2 very different skill sets. There's the writing of the book, and then there's the promotion of the book. And I think I wasn't fully prepared for what the promotion side looked like. I'm super grateful that I was able to build an amazing team, the Changemaker book launch team. So 22 students and alumni of my classes. A couple of them are on this call here, who were able to support me in that, doing everything from helping me build a TikTok channel to reaching out to companies and schools and all kinds of things. So it felt really good to me to do it in community, because I don't like doing things myself. But also when it comes back to values, like one of my values is humility. And that's almost in conflict with trying to launch a book. I think you'll see that some of the people who are most successful are those who maybe aren't so much on the confidence without attitude part. And that's kind of a superpower to be able to promote, is like, if you don't care what people think and you can just promote 24/7, like it's probably going to do you well. But I just decided that I didn't want to do that. I try to be a change maker with the book launch and do it in a way that's true to who I am and to my values. But that's not always easy, especially when there's pressure for a certain way that things are done. So overall, I learned a ton about the book writing process. And if any of you are thinking about writing a book, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be very happy to sort of advise you and share more of my story to help make it a little bit clearer for you, because we want to see your words out in the world as well.
Thank you so much for that. So if we don't have any more questions, we should let Alex go and take care of the kiddos. Suyash, go ahead. Nice to see a fellow Berkeley grad in the call.
Hi, Professor Budak, and thank you so much for spending your Thursday night with us. I guess on that note, I'm very curious. I know that you have obviously worn so many hats, and you continue to pick up more and more different things as part of who you are. You know, you are a change maker, a LinkedIn influencer, a public speaker, a father, an author, and I'm actually very curious. I know that, like, you know, being an author now, the book is published and everything, as you said, is about to start, I guess, dying down, not being as important as and taking up as much of your time as it probably did over the past couple of months. But I'm very curious to know what is next for you and what do you plan on doing in the next few months or the next few years of your life.
Oh, thanks, Yash. And first of all, shout out to you. You're one of the OG change makers. You took the class the very first semester that it was offered. And so you've been part of this from the very beginning. So yeah, in terms of what's next, I get to figure that out now. And it's kind of fun and exciting. The most meaningful thing for me has been this movement that's kind of building behind the ideas. Something that I found really exciting is that I gave a talk 2 weeks ago to a company that if I told you what they did, you would say, wow, that's a really boring company. But I love speaking with them because it's not a company you would think is a change maker company. When I started talking with them, like they were really, really getting the ideas and really excited about them. And like, that was really moving to me because it's one thing for me to go speak to, honestly, Net Impact, like you guys are already change makers, like you get it. But it's a different thing when I go talk to like a very traditional, old fashioned corporate Midwest company. And they're like, yeah, we want to be change makers too. So I don't know exactly what that will lead to, but to me, that was like a really exciting data point, which is like making me feel like we really are onto something. So whether that comes through speaking or writing or a startup, or I don't know what it is, it just helped me feel like there's something there and I'm excited to keep building it. And I'm especially excited to keep building it with all of you.
Awesome. And then we have Abhishek. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, Alex, how are you doing? So my question is, if someone wanted to discuss a topic with someone and or wanted your opinion on something or expertise on something, even if you know you may not be like 100% know everything, does that count as like maybe you could be a change maker?
So sorry, just to make sure I understand. So like people are coming to you for a question about
Let's
things
say,
or to what? To someone?
let's say they're asking you for your question on something or expertise or advice on something, but they know you know this topic more than others, even though you don't know everything.
Yeah.
Does that count as a change maker, I guess?
For sure. I mean, I wrote a book on change making. I don't know everything on change making,
Yeah.
so you can't let that hold you back. I guess a couple of thoughts there. One thing that was happening like a couple of years ago, I thought was like a great viral trend, is people would post a status where they'd say, if you heard that I was writing a book, what would that book be about? And it's really fun seeing friends post that. And it's a great way for you to get some intel on what people think you're an expert in or what they go to you for. So if you're thinking about it or just want to get that sort of feedback from your friends, encourage you to post that and just see what your friends say. It's a great way to figure things out. But also, I think there's something really important about that sort of student always mindset. So one of my favorite things, of course, is to get to advise and mentor change makers. But I'm always very clear when I do so that I'm happy to share my advice, my thoughts, but that you are the expert on your life or you're the expert on your organization. And so part of the skill is also to learn how to receive feedback. That as an early entrepreneur, I was like finding myself like taking everyone's advice and like going from this direction to this direction to this direction. But I had to start realizing like, no, I've got to like stay true to kind of my core. And so one of the things that I try to do as a mentor is remind people like, look, I'll share my story with you. I'll share my examples. As much as possible, try to take out the values that I'm talking about or the decision-making process. But you know, if you're talking to someone who's, I don't know, been in the tech world for 40 years and they're talking about like when they made the decision to go with like Windows 95 instead of DOS, like that's not an applicable decision in of itself, but the values for how they made that decision, like that's valuable. That's something you could talk about. And so I think as much as possible, try to extrapolate those values out because that's what you can then apply to your decision-making process. So yeah, I hope that helps. And thanks for that question. But yeah, absolutely. You can be a change maker, even if you don't think you know all the answers, because none of us do.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I have one last final question for you, Alex. Where can the audience find you and interact with you after this?
Oh, great. Yeah, great question. So By far my favorite social media platform is LinkedIn. So I can put it into the chat, but yeah, please connect with me there. I talk change making, and that's probably my favorite place to hang out. Also on Instagram and on TikTok as well, if you prefer that. But LinkedIn is kind of the main place that I go. And then of course, also hope that I see you on campus as well. Not on campus quite as much this semester because I've got a little one and a book, but otherwise always love connecting with students. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Alex, for coming out. And thank you, the audience, for sticking in with us and learning a little bit more about Alex's work, social impact. And I want to say a big thank you to Net Impact, ASRB, and Fighting for Hope at Cal. Thank you so much for coming out, and we'll see each other soon. Take care.
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you so much.